Chapter 1. The Son of Genoa. Once upon a time, nestled along the Italian coastline, there was a bustling city-state called Genoa. Its lively ports were like the heart of a body, pumping with energy as ships sailed in and out, carrying goods from far-off lands. It was here, in 1451, that a boy named Christopher Columbus was born into a world filled with the salty air of the sea and tales of faraway places. This environment would leave a mark on him, fostering a dream that would shape not only his life, but also the course of human history. Columbus's father, Domenico, was a wool weaver and merchant, a humble man who instilled in his son the importance of diligence and hard work. His mother, Susanna, was a woman of kindness and grace, nurturing the young Columbus and ensuring that he grew up in a loving and supportive environment. But it was the sea that truly became Columbus's first love. As a child, Columbus would often sneak away to the docks, captivated by the sailors and their tales of daring journeys on the high seas. He would listen, wide-eyed, as they spoke of foreign lands, strange creatures, and vast oceans. Each story added fuel to his growing passion for exploration. In the confines of his home, he would pore over maps and charts, tracing out the trade routes that crisscrossed the Mediterranean. He learned about the famous explorers who had sailed these seas before him, and he imagined himself following in their footsteps. At the age of 10, Columbus's fascination with the sea deepened. His father took him on a ship for the first time. The moment he stepped on the deck, feeling the wooden planks beneath his feet and the ship swaying gently with the ocean's rhythm, Columbus knew that he belonged there. He loved the smell of the ocean, the spray of the sea against his face, and the sense of freedom that came with being on the open water. Over the years, Columbus's fascination for the sea blossomed into an unquenchable thirst for discovery. The tales of Marco Polo's travels to the East Indies particularly caught his imagination. However, Columbus was aware of the dangers and difficulties that overland journeys to Asia entailed. That's when he started toying with the idea of finding a sea route to the East Indies, a dream that would take him on an adventure beyond his wildest imagination. As a young man, Columbus left Genoa to gain experience as a seafarer. He sailed around the Mediterranean, venturing as far as Chios, an Aegean island in modern-day Greece. With each voyage, his dream of exploration and discovery grew stronger. These years were a crucial training ground for the ambitious explorer, honing his navigation skills and deepening his understanding of the sea. This is how the journey of Christopher Columbus began, born in a bustling port city and raised with the roar of the sea as his lullaby. From his childhood fascination with exploration to his early experiences at sea, the birth of his dream was now firmly embedded in his spirit. Little did he know how far this dream would take him. Christopher Columbus was 14 years old when he first felt the pulse of the sea beneath a ship's wooden planks. His father, understanding his son's passion, had arranged for him to work on a merchant ship. As a cabin boy, Columbus was tasked with simple duties, but these humble beginnings allowed him to get his first real taste of life at sea. His heart pounded with excitement as the ship cut through the water, sailing away from Genoa and heading for unknown adventures. At first, the life of a sailor was not easy. It demanded physical strength and endurance, as well as mental toughness. The ship rocked with the waves, the winds were unpredictable, and the work could be backbreaking. But Columbus was not deterred. He felt at home at sea, more than he had ever felt on land. The challenges he faced were not obstacles, but stepping stones on his path to becoming an explorer. In his early voyages, Columbus sailed along the coasts of the Mediterranean. He saw firsthand how goods from different lands were traded, how languages and cultures changed from port to port, and how a ship could be a bridge between different worlds. Each journey was an opportunity to learn something new, and Columbus seized these opportunities with both hands. By the time he was in his late teens, Columbus had gained enough experience to climb up the ranks. He was no longer just a cabin boy. He became a sailor, then a navigator, charting the course of the ship and making sure they reached their destination safely. His thirst for knowledge was insatiable. He absorbed everything he could about navigation, learning to read the stars and understand the patterns of the winds and waves. Columbus's reputation as a capable and reliable sailor grew. But beyond the practical skills he was gaining, Columbus also honed his ability to lead. He learned how to motivate his fellow sailors, to mediate disputes, and to make quick decisions in the face of danger. These skills would later prove invaluable when he undertook his historic voyages across the Atlantic. Throughout his early seafaring life, Columbus's dream of exploration never waned. In fact, it grew stronger with each passing day. The tales of distant lands he had heard as a child were now replaced with first-hand experiences, further fueling his desire to explore the unknown. During this time, he often heard sailors speak of the Atlantic Ocean, of its treacherous waters and mysterious lands. They spoke of how the ocean stretched to the ends of the earth, and how those brave, or foolish, enough to venture into it were never seen again. But instead of being scared, Columbus was intrigued. He wondered if the stories were true, if there really was a world beyond the horizon. The young mariner's experiences at sea did more than just teach him the ways of the sailor. They ignited an unstoppable fire within him, a desire to explore the uncharted, to push the boundaries of what was known, and to discover what lay beyond the horizon. The sea was no longer just a home for Columbus, it was his calling. And so, with the skills he had honed and the passion that drove him, Columbus set his sights on the vast, mysterious waters of the Atlantic. Part 3. The idea of a new route. By the time Christopher Columbus was in his mid-20s, he was an accomplished mariner, skilled in navigation and well-versed in the art of sailing. However, his ambitions extended beyond the familiar routes of the Mediterranean. He was not content with simply following the paths others had already traced. He yearned to carve a new path, to challenge the boundaries of the known world. The 15th century was an era of discovery and exploration. The wealth of the East Indies, a region known today as Southeast Asia, had long been sought after by European traders. The lucrative trade of spices, silk, and other exotic goods drove European powers to find faster and safer routes to Asia. But the existing routes were treacherous, often leading through perilous terrains and exposing traders to hostile territories. The journey by land was long and dangerous. Sea routes were not much better, as they required rounding the southern tip of Africa, which was full of its own hazards. Columbus had always been captivated by the tales of Marco Polo's travels to the East Indies. The idea of sailing to these distant lands and accessing their wealth was deeply enticing. But the question was how. One day, while Columbus was studying a map, he had a sudden thought. The map, like most of the time, depicted the world as it was known to Europeans, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Beyond the coast of Europe and Africa, the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean stretched out, uncharted and intimidating. Most people thought it was endless, or that it led to a deadly drop at the edge of the world. But Columbus had a different idea. He knew the world was round, a concept that was accepted by most educated people of his time. What if one could reach the East Indies not by going east, but by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean? It was a daring thought, a radical departure from the conventional wisdom of the time. Columbus began to devour any knowledge that could support his idea. He studied texts on cosmography, navigation, and astronomy. He scrutinized the maps and charts available, learning about the trade winds and ocean currents. He gathered every piece of information that could help him understand the feasibility of a western sea route to the East Indies. As Columbus delved deeper into his research, his conviction grew. He believed he could succeed where others had not even dared to try. But to turn his revolutionary idea into reality, he would need support. He would need ships, men, and most importantly, the backing of a powerful patron. Thus, armed with a daring idea and an indomitable spirit, Columbus set out to convince the powers of his time to back his plan. The young mariner from Genoa, who had once dreamed of the sea while watching ships at the dock, was now ready to change the world. His idea of a new route was more than just a plan. It was a spark that would light the fire of the new age of exploration. Chapter 2. Seeking Patronage. In his quest to realize his daring plan, Columbus understood that he needed the backing of a powerful patron. His first choice was Portugal, a nation known for its seafaring prowess and exploratory ambitions. Portugal, under King John II, was a leading player in the age of discovery and seemed the perfect ally for Columbus's venture. The city of Lisbon, where the king resided, was a haven for explorers, filled with bustling docks and shipyards, exotic goods from overseas, and tales of distant lands. The air was filled with an aura of adventure and discovery, making it seem like the perfect place for Columbus to pitch his radical idea. Gathering his courage, Columbus requested an audience with King John II. The king, intrigued by the Genoan mariner's conviction, agreed to hear his proposal. Columbus stood before the king, his heart pounding, but his determination unwavering. He shared his plan, speaking with passion about a western sea route to the East Indies. He explained his theory, his studies, and how this new route could bring untold wealth and prestige to Portugal. However, Columbus's proposal was met with skepticism. King John II had experts in his court, the men who had led Portugal's expeditions down the coast of Africa and even rounded its southernmost tip. They believed in a route to the East Indies by continuing along the African coast, not by venturing into the unknown waters of the Atlantic. Columbus, an Italian in the court of Portugal, was an outsider with an unconventional idea. Despite his impassioned plea, Columbus's proposal was rejected. King John II, guided by his advisers, decided not to back Columbus's venture. The disappointment Columbus felt was deep, but he did not let it defeat him. He believed in his idea, in the promise of a new route, even if the king and his court did not. But there was another blow to Columbus's spirit. Not long after his rejection, he discovered a heartbreaking truth. King John II, intrigued by the Italian mariner's idea despite his rejection, had secretly dispatched a ship to test Columbus's theory. However, the ship returned reporting no land in sight and faced heavy storms, reinforcing the court's initial skepticism. The rejection was hard to swallow, but every great journey is filled with obstacles, and this was just the first one Columbus had to face. He left Lisbon, his hopes dashed but his spirit still high. He was down, but certainly not out. Columbus knew his journey to find support for his venture was far from over. His idea of a western route to the East Indies was still alive, burning brightly within him. And so he turned his sights elsewhere, ready to pitch his daring plan to a different court. Little did he know that his persistence would eventually change the course of history. After his rejection by the Portuguese king, Columbus was undeterred. He was certain of his theory and believed it was only a matter of time until he found a patron willing to support his daring venture. He set his sights on Spain, a country known for its ambitious rulers, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Arriving in Spain, Columbus felt a glimmer of hope. The country was in a period of growth and resurgence. The recent completion of the Reconquista, A long campaign to reclaim Spanish territories from Muslim rule had made Ferdinand and Isabella more open to projects that could boost Spain's status among European powers. Eager to seize this opportunity, Columbus requested an audience with the monarchs. Upon hearing his name and his grand plan, the rulers agreed to meet the persistent mariner. Columbus stood before Ferdinand and Isabella, his determined eyes meeting theirs. He outlined his proposal, speaking with the same conviction and fervour he had displayed in Portugal. He spoke of a shorter route to the East Indies, of the untapped wealth, and the potential for spreading Christianity to new lands. The Spanish monarchs listened attentively, intrigued by the audacious proposal. Unlike in Portugal, Columbus's idea did not face immediate dismissal. Instead, Ferdinand and Isabella decided to consult with their advisors, forming a committee to evaluate the potential of Columbus's western sea route. The wait for a decision was agonizing for Columbus. He watched the days turn into months, and the months into years. His life seemed to be on hold, suspended in a state of uncertainty. But his faith in his theory never wavered. Finally, after years of deliberation and negotiation, a decision was reached. Ferdinand and Isabella decided to sponsor Columbus's expedition. They were convinced not only by the potential wealth the venture could bring, but also by the prospect of spreading Christianity to the East Indies. Upon hearing the news, Columbus was overjoyed. His determination had finally paid off. He felt a rush of relief and excitement, knowing that his dream was about to become a reality. The Spanish monarchs provided Columbus with 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, and a crew of about 90 men. The agreement stated that Columbus would be given the title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea and would be appointed Viceroy and Governor of any lands he discovered. Moreover, he would receive 1/10 of all revenues from the new lands. Despite all the obstacles and setbacks, Columbus had finally found the support he needed. He was ready to embark on the journey that he had been dreaming of his whole life. With the blessing of the Spanish monarchy, Columbus prepared to sail into the unknown, his mind filled with anticipation and his heart with courage. The stage was set for one of the most significant voyages in human history. Now that he had the support of the Spanish monarchy, Columbus could finally begin the preparations for his historic voyage. It was a momentous task, fraught with challenges and filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The first step was assembling a crew. Columbus needed men who were not only physically strong and experienced sailors, but also brave enough to venture into the unknown. Many sailors were superstitious and fearful of the unexplored Atlantic, believing in tales of sea monsters and the edge of the world. Convincing these men to join the voyage required all of Columbus's persuasion skills. Columbus focused on recruiting from seafaring towns, where men were used to harsh conditions and long voyages. He spoke of the wealth and honour they would acquire from this journey, appealing to their sense of adventure and ambition. Slowly but surely, Columbus was able to assemble a crew of about 90 men, spanning from experienced sailors to young adventurers. The next challenge was preparing the ships. Columbus had been granted 3 ships by Ferdinand and Isabella, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina. The Santa Maria, the largest of the 3, was a slow but steady cargo ship, intended to carry supplies for the voyage. The Pinta and the Nina were smaller, faster ships, designed for exploration and scouting. Preparing the ships required careful planning. They needed to be stocked with enough food and water to last for a year, assuming that the journey and the return trip would each take 6 months. The ships also needed to carry tools for repairs, weapons for defence, and trade goods for any potential encounters with indigenous people. As the preparations progressed, Columbus faced another unexpected challenge. The departure date was pushed back several times due to various issues, including ship repairs and difficulty in securing supplies. The delays caused unrest among the crew and made the task of keeping their morale high even more difficult for Columbus. Despite the setbacks, Columbus never lost sight of his goal. He took the delays in stride, using the extra time to double-check every detail, ensuring that no stone was left unturned in his preparation. Finally, everything was ready. The ships were stocked, the crew was prepared, and Columbus was eager to begin his voyage. It was a journey that held many unknowns. The path was uncharted, the destination unclear, and the return uncertain. But Columbus, undeterred by the risks, was ready to sail into the uncharted waters of the Atlantic. As the ships departed from the Spanish port of Palos on August 3, 1492, Columbus looked out over the sea, his heart filled with hope and his mind buzzing with anticipation. The voyage was more than just a journey. It was a step into the unknown, a leap of faith into the vast ocean of possibilities. As the land disappeared behind them, Columbus and his crew sailed towards the horizon, marking the beginning of an epoch-making voyage that would forever change the course of human history. Chapter 3. The First Voyage. The day had finally come for Columbus and his crew to sail into the uncharted waters of the Atlantic. The Santa Maria, Pinta, and Nina, carrying about 90 men and their dreams, departed from the Spanish port of Palos on August 3, 1492. The adventure that lay ahead was fraught with mystery and danger, but also held the promise of glory and discovery. The first part of the voyage took them to the Canary Islands, where they made their final preparations and repairs. After a month, they set sail westward, heading into the vast, uncharted expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. From this point on, they were on their own, with only their knowledge, instincts, and the stars above to guide them. Life at sea was challenging. The ships were cramped, and the food, consisting mainly of hardtack, salted meat, and fish, quickly became monotonous. Fresh water was rationed, and with no land in sight, the men had to deal with the discomfort of seasickness and the constant rocking of the ships. Columbus, leading by example, remained unfazed by these hardships. His steady confidence and unwavering focus on the journey ahead kept the crew's morale high. The days turned into weeks, with the same endless expanse of blue surrounding them. There was no sight of land, and the men grew increasingly anxious. Some began to fear they would never see land again. Doubts and fear spread among the crew, threatening to derail their journey. There were whispers of mutiny, but Columbus remained resolute. He calmed the crew's fears, assuring them that they were nearing their destination. During the long journey, Columbus kept a detailed log of the voyage. He noted the distance travelled, the direction of the wind and the currents. He recorded his observations about the weather, the sea life, and any floating debris they encountered. Despite his certainty about the western route to Asia, Columbus had no idea how long the journey would take or what obstacles they might face. Finally, after 5 long weeks at sea, there were signs of land. A twig with berries, a carved piece of wood, and finally, a light spotted in the distance. The crew's spirits were lifted. The promise of land, of solid ground under their feet again, rekindled their hope and energy. On the morning of October 12, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana cried out, "Tierra, tierra." Land, land! From the decks of the ships, the crew could see a small island in the distance. As the sun rose, the sight of the island became clearer. It was an exhilarating moment, a culmination of their persistence and courage. Columbus and his men had crossed the vast and perilous Atlantic Ocean, achieving what many had deemed impossible. Though they believed they had reached the East Indies, They had in fact arrived in a new world, one that was unknown to them. The true magnitude of their discovery was yet to be revealed. Little did they know that their journey was just beginning, and what lay ahead was a series of events that would forever change the course of human history. The moment Columbus and his crew had been waiting for had finally arrived. They were about to set foot on land after a long and treacherous journey across the Atlantic. The sight of the green, lush island not only signaled the end of their voyage, but also the beginning of a new chapter in human history. On the morning of October 12, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The first signs of land, the twig with berries, the carved piece of wood, the flicker of light, had stirred excitement among the weary crew. Rodrigo de Triana's cry of "Tierra, tierra" had sparked a joyous uproar among the men. As the sun rose, its first rays illuminated the island. It was a beautiful sight. Palm trees swayed in the gentle breeze, birds circled above, and the soft sound of waves crashing against the shoreline filled the air. It was an island teeming with life, a stark contrast to the endless blue they had seen for weeks. Filled with awe and relief, Columbus and his crew prepared to disembark. The three ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, dropped their anchors, and small rowboats were lowered. Columbus, dressed in full armour and carrying the royal banner of Spain, led the first party ashore. As Columbus's boots touched the sandy shore, he fell to his knees, kissed the ground, and gave thanks for their safe journey. His crew followed suit, their joy and relief palpable. They had survived the Atlantic crossing, and were now standing on what they believed to be the shores of the East Indies. To mark the occasion, Columbus named the island San Salvador, meaning Holy Saviour. He claimed the land for Spain, oblivious to the fact that the island was already inhabited and had its own name, Guanahani, given by the native people. Columbus and his men were not alone on the island. They soon encountered the native people, who watched with curiosity from the tree line. The locals were friendly and welcoming, but communication proved difficult. Columbus believed he had reached the Indies, so he referred to these people as Indians, a name that would stick for centuries. The first meetings were filled with gestures and attempts at communication. Columbus and his men offered the locals beads and trinkets, and in return they received fresh fruit and other local produce. These interactions, though seemingly peaceful, marked the beginning of a complex and often tragic relationship between the Europeans and the indigenous peoples of the New World. As the day ended, Columbus and his crew celebrated their successful voyage. Under the starlit sky, they shared stories and dreams of what lay ahead. They believed they had found a new route to the East Indies, a claim that would bring them wealth and honour. Little did they know that they had landed in a world unknown to them, a world that was far from the lands described in Marco Polo's accounts. Their journey of discovery was far from over. It was just the beginning. With their feet on solid ground again, Columbus and his crew were eager to explore this new land they had discovered. Little did they know they were about to encounter cultures and people far removed from anything they had known or read about. Columbus named the first island they landed on as San Salvador. The native people, whom Columbus named Indians believing he was in India, were a friendly and peaceful group known as the Taino. The Taino were curious about these strange visitors and welcomed them warmly. Despite the language barrier, they managed to communicate through gestures and traded goods. Columbus and his men offered the Taino people beads, cloth, and trinkets, while in return they received fresh fruit, birds, and other local produce. The Europeans were intrigued by the Taino's gold ornaments, sparking dreams of vast gold reserves waiting to be discovered. Eager to explore more, Columbus set sail again, visiting other islands of the archipelago. He was amazed by the lush vegetation, colourful birds, and warm climate of these islands. Each new island brought forth more Indians, each with their unique ways of life and cultures. All this was meticulously noted down in Columbus's log, providing the first European account of the New World. On one of these islands, which Columbus named Hispaniola, they encountered another tribe, the Arawak. They were similar to the Taino in appearance and lifestyle, but had their unique customs. Here, Columbus set up a small fort named Navidad, leaving behind a handful of men with instructions to explore and collect gold. Yet, not all encounters were peaceful. In some islands, the Europeans faced hostility from tribes who were more aggressive and wary of the strangers. Such encounters often turned violent, causing tension among Columbus's crew and creating fear and mistrust towards the natives. Despite the challenges, Columbus remained focused on his mission. He believed he was close to the riches of the East Indies that Marco Polo had described in his accounts. The gold ornaments worn by the natives fueled his belief that vast treasures were waiting to be discovered. Columbus also had an eye on claiming more lands for Spain, hoping to establish Spanish colonies in this New World. As Columbus explored these unfamiliar lands and interacted with the local people, he started creating a mental map of the region. He noted the currents, the winds, the vegetation, the wildlife, and, most importantly, the people. These details formed the first European understanding of the New World, marking a crucial turning point in human history. Yet, amidst all the exploration and discovery, a crucial realization eluded Columbus. He was not in the East Indies as he believed. He had stumbled upon a part of the world unknown to Europeans, a world that held more surprises, challenges, and treasures than he could ever imagine. As the first voyage concluded, Columbus prepared to return to Spain, unaware of the magnitude of his discovery and the ripple of change it would create across the world. Chapter 4. Triumph and Conflict. With discoveries made and interactions recorded, Columbus decided it was time to return to Spain. The memory of the treacherous Atlantic crossing lingered, but now they were seasoned sailors, aware of the challenges and equipped with the knowledge gained during the voyage. However, this journey would be marked by triumph, but also by adversity. The journey back to Spain began on January 16, 1493. The Santa Maria, Columbus's flagship, had run aground near Hispaniola, so only the Nina and Pinta were making the return journey. Just a few days into their voyage, a terrible storm forced the two ships to separate. Columbus, aboard the Nina, was left alone in the ferocious Atlantic, tossed and turned by the angry waves. With a smaller crew, dwindling supplies, and an unforgiving storm, the journey seemed impossible. But Columbus's spirit was unbroken. He penned letters detailing his voyage and discoveries, placing them in a cask, and threw it overboard, hoping that if he did not survive, his discoveries would. But fortune favoured Columbus. The storm subsided, and Columbus and his weary crew spotted land, the Azores. The sight of the familiar European landscape filled their hearts with joy. After a short stopover, they resumed their journey, this time to the Spanish mainland. Finally, on March 15, 1493, the Nina sailed into the harbour of Palos, from where they had set sail more than 7 months ago. As the ship anchored, Columbus could hardly believe what he had accomplished. He had not only survived a treacherous journey across the Atlantic, but had also discovered new lands, peoples, and potential riches. News of Columbus's return spread quickly throughout Spain. His tales of islands with friendly natives, lush vegetation, and hints of gold and spices ignited the imagination of the Spanish people. Columbus became a national hero overnight. He was received by the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, in Barcelona, where he presented them with the exotic items he had brought back, including parrots, gold, and some Indians. Columbus's triumphant return to Spain marked the successful completion of what many had deemed an impossible journey. The dreamer from Genoa had proved his critics wrong. His discovery would soon be known across Europe, bringing him fame and recognition. But his return was not just about personal triumph. It was a victory for Spain, solidifying its status as a rising power, eager to rival Portugal in the age of exploration. Yet, amid all the celebrations and accolades, seeds of conflict were being sown. There were those who questioned Columbus's claims, his leadership, and his treatment of the native people. Many among his own crew felt overlooked and unappreciated, while the natives back in the New World had their first taste of European ambition and greed. As Columbus basked in his triumph, little did he know that his adventures had just begun, and his decisions would shape not only his fate, but also that of two worlds. With Columbus's successful return to Spain, he found himself thrust into the limelight. His journey had been a triumph, and he was celebrated as a national hero. His tales of new lands, exotic creatures, and cultures captivated the imaginations of people far and wide. Yet, fame often brings with it controversy, and for Columbus it was no different. The promises of gold and spices he had made before his voyage had created great expectations. The gold ornaments and trinkets he brought back hinted at the potential wealth waiting to be discovered. Yet the amounts were small, and certainly not the vast riches that were expected. This led to doubts and rumours among some courtiers and members of the public. Was Columbus exaggerating the prospects of gold in the new lands, they wondered. Then there were his interactions with the native peoples of the New World. Columbus had presented them as peaceful and friendly, willing to trade their possessions for simple European trinkets. He had even brought some of them back to Spain, displaying them as evidence of his discovery. Yet, some among the court and public were uneasy about the way Columbus spoke of these Indians. His plans to civilize them, convert them to Christianity, and use them as labor raised ethical questions. Was Columbus exploiting these innocent people for his personal gain and glory? Furthermore, whispers of dissent began among the crew members who had returned with Columbus. They felt overlooked and unappreciated. Their heroic efforts on the voyage seemed overshadowed by Columbus's fame. Some claimed that Columbus had treated them harshly during the voyage, often making decisions without consulting them. The man they saw being celebrated in court was different from the man they had experienced at sea. As these controversies swirled around him, Columbus found himself defending his actions and claims. He insisted that his accounts of the New World were accurate. He believed that with more voyages, they could find the gold and spices they sought. He also defended his treatment of the Indians, maintaining that his intentions were to civilize them and bring them under the protection of the Spanish crown. The more Columbus defended himself, the more polarizing he became. The public and the court were divided in their opinions. Some saw him as a national hero, an explorer of the highest order who had put Spain on the world map. Others viewed him as an opportunist, exploiting the promise of new lands for personal glory. Amidst all these controversies, one thing was clear: Columbus had started something that could not be undone. He had bridged the old world with the new, a feat that would bring untold changes, challenges, and conflicts in the years to come. The journey of Christopher Columbus was far from over. Indeed, the most challenging chapters were yet to unfold. Eager to capitalize on Columbus's discoveries, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella agreed to fund a second voyage. This time, Columbus was not setting off into the unknown. He was tasked with establishing a permanent colony in the New World and converting the natives to Christianity. Little did he know, This voyage would prove more challenging than the first. Columbus's fleet for the second voyage was much larger. On September 25, 1493, he set sail with 17 ships, carrying around 1,200 men, including soldiers, farmers, and craftsmen. There were also priests to convert the natives, and livestock and supplies to set up a colony. The journey across the Atlantic was smooth, and within a few weeks they spotted land. It was the New World, and it was as beautiful and mysterious as Columbus remembered. Columbus's first order of business was to check on the men he had left at Fort Navidad during his first voyage. But what he found was a shocking sight. The fort was destroyed, and all the men were gone. Through signs and gestures, the natives explained that disputes over gold had led to fights, and eventually the fort was attacked. The dream of gold had brought the first blood to the New World. Shaken but not deterred, Columbus decided to proceed with establishing a new colony. He chose a location on the northern coast of Hispaniola, which he named La Isabela, after Queen Isabella. The men began building houses, a church, and a fort. They planted crops and started interacting with the natives. The first European colony in the New World was taking shape. But life in La Isabela was far from the utopia Columbus had envisioned. The weather was harsh, disease spread rapidly, and food shortages became common. The natives, who had initially welcomed the Europeans, were growing wary of their demands for gold and labor. Relations between the colonists and the natives started deteriorating. The promise of a new world filled with riches was gradually turning into a nightmare of disease, hunger, and conflict. Despite the difficulties, Columbus pushed on. He explored other islands, always on the lookout for the promised riches. He encountered new tribes, claimed new lands for Spain, and collected any gold he found. But the challenges at La Isabela continued to grow, with growing unrest among the colonists and increasing tension with the natives. As Columbus navigated the trials of establishing a colony, his leadership was put to the ultimate test. His dream of a prosperous new world where Europeans and natives lived in harmony was beginning to crumble. The challenges of the second voyage were a stark reminder that discovering new lands was just the beginning. The real test was making these new lands a home. Columbus's second voyage marked the start of European colonization in the New World. Yet, it also highlighted the challenges that came with it: cultural clashes, disease, the lust for gold, and the question of leadership. As Columbus wrestled with these issues, his triumphs were increasingly marred by conflicts. But his adventures in the New World were far from over. The journey of Christopher Columbus, the son of Genoa, continued, etching a path through history that would forever change the world. Chapter 5. The Third Voyage and Discontent. Christopher Columbus's third voyage was a mission driven by two primary goals: to rectify the troubles plaguing the settlement at La Isabela and to continue the exploration of the new lands. As Columbus prepared for this journey, he was filled with a sense of determination, but little did he know, this voyage would bring about some of the most significant challenges of his life. On May 30, 1498, Columbus set sail from the Spanish port of Sanlúcar de Barrameda with 6 ships. This time, Columbus chose a more southerly route, leading him towards the islands of Cape Verde, off the coast of Africa. The voyage was arduous, the heat was blistering, and supplies of fresh water quickly dwindled. Yet Columbus, undeterred, pressed on. In late July, the fleet split into 2. 3 ships continued their journey towards Hispaniola, carrying much-needed supplies for the struggling colony at La Isabela, while Columbus, captaining the remaining 3 ships, ventured further south. Columbus, always guided by his fascination and desire for discovery, was not disappointed. On August 1, 1498, his fleet sighted land, a stretch of coastline that was part of what we now know as South America, making this the first documented European expedition to reach the mainland of the Western Hemisphere. Columbus, however, was still convinced he had found a part of Asia. He named this land Isla Santa, failing to realize the significance of his discovery. Exploring this new land was filled with awe and excitement. The landscape was vast, with massive rivers and towering mountains, different from the islands they had encountered before. The natives they met were peaceful, with rich cultures that intrigued Columbus and his men. Columbus was particularly fascinated by the natives' descriptions of a region rich in gold, feeding his enduring dream of finding the vast wealth of the East. Yet, even as Columbus explored these new lands, news from La Isabela was disheartening. The settlement was in chaos. The colonists were ill, hungry, and unhappy. Conflicts with the natives were growing, and there were even reports of a rebellion against Columbus's rule. It seemed that Columbus's dream of a prosperous new world was being threatened by the harsh reality of disease, scarcity, and conflict. As the third voyage continued, Columbus faced new lands, new peoples, and new discoveries with the same courage and curiosity that had always driven him. But the growing troubles at La Isabela weighed heavily on him. He was not just an explorer now. He was a governor responsible for the lives of his people. Columbus's third voyage, thus, marked the beginning of a new chapter in his journey, a chapter where he discovered the South American mainland, but also where he began grappling with the challenges of leadership and governance. Little did he know, these struggles would only intensify in the coming years, testing Columbus in ways he had never imagined. While Columbus was exploring new lands and making discoveries, trouble was brewing in Hispaniola, particularly in the settlement of La Isabela. The colonists had arrived with dreams of prosperity and wealth, but their reality had been far from it. Disease, food scarcity, and harsh conditions had turned their New World dreams into nightmares. But the real challenge for Columbus was not the hardships of the colony. It was the discontent among his people, which was escalating towards open rebellion. By the time Columbus returned to Hispaniola from his explorations, the situation had worsened. The colonists were disheartened and angry. They had expected gold and easy riches, but instead they faced endless work and little reward. Their frustrations were heightened by Columbus's strict rule and his obsession with finding gold. For the colonists, it seemed that Columbus cared more about his dreams of wealth than their well-being. The unrest among the colonists eventually led to a rebellion, led by Francisco Roldan, a man whom Columbus had trusted and appointed as the town mayor. Roldan was charismatic and knew how to play on the colonists' fears and frustrations. He accused Columbus of misleading them and declared that it was time for a change in leadership. As the rebellion grew, Columbus found himself in a precarious position. He tried to pacify the rebels, offering them more freedoms and concessions, but his promises fell on deaf ears. The colonists were disillusioned and felt betrayed. Their dream of a better life in the New World had been shattered, and they blamed Columbus. At the same time, news of the rebellion reached the Spanish monarchs. They were alarmed and disappointed. They had invested heavily in Columbus's ventures and expected him to maintain order and ensure prosperity in the colonies. The news of rebellion and discontent was a clear indication that Columbus was failing in his duties as a governor. As the rebellion intensified, Columbus was pushed to his limits. He was an explorer at heart, not a politician. He had dreamt of discovering new lands and finding a route to the East Indies. But instead, he was mired in conflicts, struggling to keep control over a dream that was quickly turning into a nightmare. This part of Columbus's journey revealed a different kind of challenge, one of leadership and governance. It showed how the promise of a new world was not just about discovery and exploration, but also about managing people, resolving conflicts, and maintaining peace. It was a test that Columbus had not prepared for, a test that would ultimately change the course of his journey. As discontent festered in the colony, the situation in Hispaniola escalated to an alarming degree. Reports of mismanagement, rebellion, and cruelty towards the natives reached the Spanish monarchs. Concerned and disappointed, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella decided to take drastic measures. They sent a royal commissioner, Francisco de Bobadilla, to investigate the situation. Bobadilla arrived in Hispaniola in August 1500 to a scene of chaos. He found the colony in disarray, with disgruntled colonists and unhappy natives. Listening to the complaints and testimonies of the colonists, Bobadilla quickly formed an unfavourable opinion of Columbus. He concluded that Columbus's leadership was the root cause of the colony's problems. Without waiting for Columbus's defence, Bobadilla arrested him and his brothers, who were also involved in governing the colony. The great explorer, who was once hailed as the Admiral of the Ocean Sea, was put in chains. It was a shocking fall from grace, an episode that tainted Columbus's grand achievements. The news of Columbus's arrest sent shockwaves across Spain. Many found it hard to believe that the celebrated explorer was now a prisoner. Columbus was transported back to Spain in chains, a sight that deeply saddened and angered him. He felt betrayed by the very monarchs who had once supported him. Yet, Columbus was not entirely without allies. On his return to Spain, he was allowed to plead his case before Ferdinand and Isabella. Columbus defended himself passionately, recounting his voyages, discoveries, and the difficulties of managing the colony. He argued that he was a victim of a conspiracy by disloyal colonists who resented his strict rule. Moved by Columbus's pleas and mindful of his services to Spain, the monarchs decided to pardon him. The chains were removed, and Columbus was a free man once again. However, his title as Governor of the Indies was not restored. He was an explorer in the eyes of the monarchs, not a governor. This phase of Columbus's life was a testament to the unpredictable nature of his journey. From a revered explorer to a disgraced governor, and then to a pardoned man, Columbus's life was marked by highs and lows. But throughout it all, his spirit remained unbroken. Even in his darkest moments, Columbus clung to his dreams of exploration and discovery, dreams that would soon lead him to his final voyage to the New World. Chapter 6. The Final Voyage. Despite the hardships and humiliations he had faced, Christopher Columbus was not ready to give up his passion for exploration. He had lost his position as governor, but he had not lost his thirst for discovery or his desire to find a western sea route to the East Indies. After a year of negotiations and pleading, Columbus was granted permission by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to embark on a fourth voyage. This would turn out to be his final journey to the New World. On May 9, 1502, Columbus, accompanied by his younger son Fernando and his brother Bartolomeo, set sail from Cadiz, Spain. His fleet consisted of 4 small ships, carrying a crew of 150 men. Columbus, ever the explorer, had a new plan. He wanted to find a strait in the newly discovered lands that he believed would lead him to the Indian Ocean. The voyage started under ominous clouds. Columbus was forbidden to stop at Hispaniola for supplies due to the recent conflicts, a decision that would soon haunt the crew. He also received warnings of a brewing hurricane, but he decided to press on, showing an unwavering resolve that both inspired and worried his men. The crew encountered their first storm just a few days after setting sail, a taste of the many challenges they would face. The crew battled heavy rains, fierce winds, and massive waves, a reminder of the perilous nature of sea voyages in that era. Despite these adversities, Columbus kept his fleet steady, his eyes firmly on the horizon. Their first landfall was on the island of Martinique, but Columbus, driven by his grand plan, did not stay for long. They sailed west, exploring the coastlines of present-day Central America, from Honduras to Panama. Yet, despite their extensive explorations, the strait that Columbus sought remained elusive. The fourth voyage was proving to be a challenging and disappointing one. Not only was the strait nowhere to be found, but the relations with the native tribes were also turning hostile. Incidents of violence and conflict escalated, leading to losses on both sides. To make matters worse, their ships, battered by storms and infested with shipworms, were starting to deteriorate. Columbus was forced to beach his ships on the coast of Jamaica, leaving the crews stranded far from home. The fourth voyage was far from the triumph Columbus had hoped for. Instead, it was filled with disappointments, challenges, and an ever-growing sense of desperation. Yet, despite the despair, Columbus clung to his dream, his belief in his mission. He remained a man driven by exploration, undeterred by the mounting obstacles. As the fourth voyage drew to its difficult end, Columbus and his crew were stuck on a foreign land, uncertain of their fate. Little did they know, their biggest trial was yet to come. But for now, Columbus, the relentless explorer, could only look out at the vast sea, his dreams as boundless as the waters before him. Shipwrecked on the coast of Jamaica, Christopher Columbus and his crew found themselves in a desperate situation. Their ships were irreparably damaged and incapable of making the long journey back to Spain. Columbus knew that their only hope was rescue, but that seemed a distant possibility on this remote island. The crew's first priority was survival. They built a makeshift camp using the materials salvaged from the ships. They traded with the local natives, exchanging trinkets and beads for food and water. Initially, the natives were friendly, sympathetic to the castaways' plight. They provided the crew with cassava, fish, and fruit, ensuring their survival in the initial months. However, as weeks turned into months, the natives' goodwill began to wane. The endless demand for food from Columbus's men strained their resources. Resentment grew, and the natives stopped their supplies. Faced with the threat of starvation, the situation in the camp grew tense. Morale dropped, and the men, once loyal to Columbus, started questioning his leadership. In this dire situation, Columbus came up with a plan. He knew, from his navigational charts and almanacs, that a lunar eclipse was due to occur soon. Using this knowledge, he decided to stage a display of his divine power to regain the natives' favor. He called for a meeting with the native chiefs and predicted that the moon would disappear from the sky as a sign of the gods' anger at the natives' lack of support. When the lunar eclipse occurred as Columbus predicted, the natives were awestruck. Fearing divine wrath, they hurriedly agreed to continue providing food and assistance. While this clever ploy bought the crew some time, it didn't solve the underlying problem. They needed to be rescued. Columbus sent a party of men in a canoe to navigate the open ocean and reach Hispaniola. It was a desperate and dangerous journey, but it was their only hope. This small group of men, against all odds, successfully reached Hispaniola after a grueling journey. However, securing a rescue mission proved to be a challenge. Hispaniola was still grappling with its own problems, and the new governor was hesitant to help Columbus, whom he viewed as a potential rival. Months passed, with each day testing the stranded crew's resolve. Meanwhile, in Hispaniola, Columbus's men were struggling to convince the governor. It was only when a new ship arrived from Spain, bearing a letter of commendation for Columbus from the Spanish monarchs, that the governor relented. Finally, After an agonizing wait of over a year, a rescue ship arrived in Jamaica. Columbus and his crew, warm and weary, were saved. Their ordeal was over. Columbus's final voyage, marred by disasters and disappointments, had come to an end. Despite the challenges, Columbus's spirit remained undaunted. His passion for exploration, his relentless pursuit of discovery, never wavered, even in the face of despair. He returned to Spain not as a triumphant explorer, but as a survivor. His final voyage was a testament to his resilience, his courage, and his unwavering belief in his dreams. Rescued and finally back on Spanish soil, Christopher Columbus was a changed man. He had returned not as the triumphant explorer he once was, but as a survivor. His body bore the scars of his arduous journey. His gait was slower, but his spirit remained unbroken. The last voyage had taken a significant toll on Columbus. He was no longer the vibrant, determined explorer he once was. His health was failing, and his dreams of establishing a western route to the East Indies seemed further away than ever. Yet, Columbus clung to his belief that he had discovered a new path to Asia, despite the increasing evidence to the contrary. Columbus moved to the city of Valladolid in Spain, hoping to spend his remaining years in peace. However, his final years were anything but tranquil. He battled for recognition, seeking recompense for the wealth and titles he believed were rightfully his. He had been promised a significant portion of the riches from his discoveries, but these rewards were denied to him by the crown. In the eyes of the court, Columbus was a controversial figure. His contributions to the world were undeniable, yet his governance of Hispaniola and the atrocities committed under his rule were significant stains on his reputation. His fall from grace was as rapid as his rise to fame. Columbus spent his remaining years in litigation, fighting for his lost titles and promised wealth. This battle, known as the Pleitos Colombinos, was a complex legal struggle that extended beyond Columbus's lifetime. His son Diego continued the fight after his father's death, seeking justice for his family's claims. In the midst of this legal battle, Columbus's health continued to deteriorate. He suffered from a range of ailments, the result of years of hard sea travel, and the stressful circumstances of his final years. Despite his failing health, he never ceased to dream of new explorations. He was, until the very end, an explorer at heart. On May 20, 1506, Christopher Columbus passed away. His death was relatively quiet, a stark contrast to the adventurous, tumultuous life he had led. He died believing he had found a new route to the East Indies, a conviction he held on to until his final breath. Columbus's final years were a mixture of struggle and disappointment, but they in no way diminish his significant contributions. He changed the world's understanding of geography, opened up a new era of exploration, and connected continents. His voyages marked the beginning of lasting contact between Europe and the Americas, shaping the course of history. Christopher Columbus's life was a testament to the human spirit's unyielding desire to explore and discover. His journeys, filled with incredible highs and devastating lows, are a reminder that discovery is as much about the journey as it is about the destination. As Columbus's life journey came to an end, his legacy continued to live on, forever a part of the annals of human exploration. Chapter 7. Columbus's Legacy. The voyages of Christopher Columbus sparked a wave of change across Europe, shifting the course of history. The ripples of Columbus's discoveries reached far and wide, influencing many facets of European life, from culture and economy to politics and science. For centuries, Europe had been somewhat isolated, with the vast majority of its trade and exploration focused on the Mediterranean and its immediate surroundings. Columbus's voyages opened a new world of possibilities, quite literally. His discovery of the New World revolutionized Europe's understanding of the planet, forever altering the established views of geography and navigation. Columbus's voyages led to the Age of Discovery, an era marked by intensive exploration and colonialism. European nations raced to explore and claim parts of the New World. Spain, England, France, and Portugal expanded their territories, establishing colonies in the Americas. This marked the beginning of the European colonization of the Americas, with profound effects on the indigenous peoples. The discovery of the New World brought untold wealth to Europe. Gold, silver, and other precious materials flowed into European coffers, particularly those of Spain, enhancing its status as a superpower. The trade of goods such as tobacco, corn, and potatoes, which were previously unknown in Europe, also significantly boosted the European economy. But the impact was not just economic. The new goods, such as tomatoes, potatoes, and chocolate, forever changed European diets and cuisine. In return, Europeans introduced wheat, sugar, and livestock to the Americas, transforming the local diet and agriculture there. Columbus's discoveries also shaped European politics. The desire to claim and control territories in the New World intensified rivalries among European nations. The resulting competition and conflict fueled the development of navies and impacted diplomatic relations, leading to a shift in power dynamics. It led to treaties like the Treaty of Tordesillas, which aimed to divide the New World between Spain and Portugal. In terms of culture and science, Columbus's voyages ignited curiosity and inspired further exploration and scientific research. The voyages challenged the accepted scientific and religious views of the time, leading to a shift towards more empirical methods of study. It spurred the advancement of cartography, navigation, and shipbuilding. However, the impact of Columbus's voyages on Europe was not without controversy. The voyages set off a chain of events that led to the enslavement, exploitation, and decimation of indigenous populations in the Americas. The repercussions of these actions are still felt today, leading to a complex and contested legacy. In conclusion, the impact of Columbus's voyages on Europe was profound and far-reaching. His discoveries shaped the continent's economic, political, and cultural landscape, marking the beginning of a new era in European history. The Son of Genoa, through his unwavering desire to explore and discover, changed the world in ways he could never have imagined. While Christopher Columbus's voyages brought about an era of great change and prosperity for Europe, they spelled a time of considerable upheaval and devastation for the native peoples of the Americas. Before Columbus set foot in the New World, the Americas were home to a wide array of diverse cultures and civilizations, including the Inca, Maya, and Aztec in the south, and numerous tribes such as the Iroquois, Sioux, and Apache in the north. Their societies were complex, with advanced systems of agriculture, architecture, and governance. The arrival of Columbus marked the beginning of the end for many of these civilizations. His voyages set in motion a series of events that would dramatically alter the lives of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The Europeans who followed Columbus came not just as explorers, but as conquerors, settlers, and colonizers. One of the most devastating impacts was the introduction of diseases to which the native peoples had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, and influenza ravaged the indigenous populations, causing death on a massive scale. Some historians estimate that within a century of Columbus's arrival, up to 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas had died due to disease. The European colonizers seized native lands, exploiting the rich resources for their benefit. Gold, silver, and other precious materials were extracted and shipped back to Europe, stripping the land of its wealth. Indigenous people were forced into labor, enslaved to work in the mines and plantations established by the colonizers. Cultural destruction was another significant impact. European colonizers often imposed their languages, religions, and ways of life on the native peoples, erasing centuries-old traditions and practices. Native languages dwindled, and indigenous religions were suppressed as Christianity was forcefully spread. Yet, despite the profound adversity they faced, the indigenous peoples of the Americas showed remarkable resilience. They resisted the invaders, fought for their rights, and struggled to preserve their cultures. Some of their traditions and languages have survived to this day, a testament to their enduring strength. The legacy of Columbus in the New World is a complex and painful one. His voyages marked the beginning of a period of immense suffering for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. But they also set the stage for the creation of a new world, one that would be shaped by the blending of cultures, the clash of civilizations, and the indomitable spirit of survival. In understanding Columbus's legacy, it is important to recognize the full scope of his impact: the exploration and discovery, the colonization and exploitation, and the resilience and survival. His story serves as a stark reminder of the profound and lasting impact of our actions on the world and its peoples. As time has moved forward, our understanding of the past has evolved, and with it, our perception of historical figures like Christopher Columbus. How Columbus is viewed today is the result of centuries of reinterpretation and reassessment of his voyages and their impact. In the centuries following Columbus's voyages, he was largely celebrated as a heroic explorer, a man who dared to venture into the unknown and opened up a new world to Europe. He was seen as a symbol of bravery and determination. Schools, cities, and monuments were named in his honor, and his expeditions were commemorated with grand ceremonies, such as the World's Columbian Exposition held in Chicago in 1893. For many years, the narrative surrounding Columbus in Europe and the Americas primarily focused on his role as a navigator and explorer. His discoveries were celebrated, and his faults were largely overlooked. Columbus Day, celebrated in various forms across the Americas and in Spain, was a testament to this celebratory view. However, in more recent times, there has been a significant shift in the narrative. With a greater emphasis on social justice and historical accuracy, there has been increased scrutiny of Columbus's treatment of the indigenous peoples and the devastating effects of his voyages. Some argue that Columbus was not a hero, but a catalyst for genocide, pointing to the mass deaths of indigenous people from diseases brought by the Europeans, forced labor, and violent conquests. Calls have been made to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day in the United States, recognizing the cultures and contributions of the Native American peoples. In recent years, statues of Columbus have been the focus of protests and debates, with some being defaced or removed. Such actions reflect the increasingly controversial place Columbus holds in modern consciousness. For many, these statues are not just depictions of a man, but symbols of colonialism, exploitation, and violence against indigenous peoples. However, it's also important to note that views on Columbus remain diverse. Some still honor him as an explorer and argue that his actions should be judged in the context of his time, not by modern standards. They argue that while the negative impacts of his voyages should not be ignored, it is also important to recognize his role in global history. The story of Columbus in modern times is a story of shifting perspectives, reflecting changing societal values and understandings. As we continue to grapple with the legacy of Columbus, it is crucial to remember that history is often complex and multifaceted, requiring us to constantly question, learn, and reassess our understanding. Chapter 8. Debunking the myths. There is a well-known tale that suggests Christopher Columbus was the only person in his time who believed the earth was round. That he had to argue against scholars and the church who all held the belief that the earth was flat. But is this story based on fact? Let's take a closer look and separate myth from reality. The truth is that the idea of a spherical earth has been around for thousands of years before Columbus. The ancient Greeks were among the first to suggest that the earth was round, not flat. The philosopher Pythagoras, who lived in the 6th century BC, is often credited with this discovery. Later, another Greek philosopher, Aristotle, provided physical evidence to support this idea. He noted that during a lunar eclipse, the Earth's shadow on the moon is round. This observation could only be explained if the Earth was spherical. Fast forward to Columbus's time, and the idea of a round Earth was well established among educated people. In fact, the main point of disagreement was not whether the Earth was round, but how large it was. Scholars in Columbus's day had calculated the Earth's circumference with impressive accuracy using the same techniques developed by the ancient Greeks. The problem was, Columbus disagreed with these calculations. He believed that the Earth was much smaller, and hence, he thought he could reach Asia by sailing west from Europe in a much shorter time. When Columbus presented his plans to the scholars at the University of Salamanca, they didn't reject his ideas because they believed the earth was flat. They rejected his ideas because they knew the earth was much larger than Columbus was claiming. They were correct, and Columbus was wrong. If the Americas hadn't existed, and Columbus had kept sailing, his voyage would have ended in disaster. So how did the myth of Columbus proving the earth was round come to be so popular? This misinterpretation of history can be traced back to the 19th century, when American author Washington Irving wrote a fictionalized biography of Columbus. In this book, Irving painted an image of Columbus defending the idea of a round earth against narrow-minded scholars who believed it was flat. This dramatic tale caught the public's imagination and has persisted in popular culture, even though it's historically inaccurate. Debunking this myth helps us better understand the real historical context of Columbus's voyages. It reminds us of the importance of questioning popular narratives and seeking a more accurate understanding of our past. In the end, the story of Columbus and the round earth serves as a testament to the enduring power of myth and the importance of historical truth. The narrative of Columbus's encounters with the indigenous peoples of the Americas is a subject of much debate and controversy. Some myths paint a peaceful picture of these encounters, while others depict a more conflict-ridden reality. Let's delve deeper into the truth of these complex relationships. Upon arriving in the New World, Columbus and his crew encountered various indigenous groups, such as the Taino people in the Caribbean. Columbus wrote in his journal that the Taino were peaceful and friendly, describing them with admiration for their generosity and simplicity. This positive portrayal, however, is only one side of the story. While Columbus may have initially established peaceful contact, the relations between the Europeans and the indigenous peoples quickly became strained. The indigenous groups were enslaved and subjected to harsh labor in gold mines and plantations. Many died from overwork, disease, and violence, marking the beginning of a tragic history of exploitation and abuse. A common myth is that Columbus's actions towards the indigenous peoples were acceptable by the standards of his time. While it's true that attitudes and societal norms were different, there were contemporaries of Columbus who criticized his treatment of the indigenous peoples. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spanish priest who initially participated in the conquest of the Americas, became an outspoken critic of the Spanish cruelty towards the indigenous peoples. Another myth is that the indigenous peoples were passive victims in this history. However, this view underestimates the agency and resilience of these communities. There were instances of resistance and rebellion against the European invaders, demonstrating their bravery and their struggle to defend their lands and ways of life. The perception of Columbus as a benevolent discoverer is a simplified version of a much more complex and grim history. His voyages led to the colonization of the Americas, which had devastating impacts on the indigenous populations. The reality of Columbus's interactions with the native peoples is a narrative of conquest and oppression, not just discovery and exploration. Debunking these myths about Columbus and the native peoples is essential for a more accurate understanding of the past. It's a reminder of the dark side of the age of discovery and the heavy price paid by the indigenous peoples of the Americas. As we reflect on this history, we must strive for narratives that recognize these realities and honor the experiences and perspectives of the indigenous peoples. One of the most enduring myths about Christopher Columbus is that he discovered America. But what does it mean to discover? Is it fair or accurate to use this term when speaking about lands already populated by diverse and complex civilizations? Let's delve into this question and challenge the common narrative. When Columbus arrived in the Bahamas in 1492, he believed he had found a new route to Asia. He called the people he encountered Indians because he thought he had landed in the Indies, East Asia. However, Columbus had not landed in Asia. He had landed in what would later be known as the Americas, a continent with civilizations and cultures that had been thriving for thousands of years. These civilizations included the great empires of the Inca and the Aztec, as well as countless other societies spread across North, Central, and South America. These societies had complex political systems, advanced technologies, and rich cultural traditions. By the time Columbus arrived, the Americas were already home to millions of people. The concept of discovery implies that a place is unknown until someone from the discovering civilization finds it. This idea is based on a Eurocentric perspective that overlooks or diminishes the histories and accomplishments of non-European peoples. When we say Columbus discovered America, it disregards the existence of the people who lived there long before Columbus set sail. Additionally, Columbus was not even the first European to reach the Americas. Norse Viking Leif Erikson had reached what is now Newfoundland, Canada, almost 500 years before Columbus. However, Ericsson's voyages did not lead to widespread knowledge or sustained contact between Europe and the Americas. The idea of Columbus discovering America is a simplified version of a much more intricate historical event. In reality, Columbus's voyage was the beginning of sustained contact between Europe and the Americas, leading to profound and often devastating changes for the people living there. In debunking this myth, we are not diminishing the significance of Columbus's voyages. They undoubtedly had a profound impact on world history. But by challenging the notion of discovery, we gain a more nuanced understanding of this history. We recognize the rich tapestry of civilizations that already existed in the Americas, and we question the narratives that center only on European perspectives. This way, we can honor and acknowledge the full complexity and diversity of our shared global history. Chapter 9. Columbus in Popular Culture. Throughout the years, Christopher Columbus has made his way into all forms of literature, from novels and biographies to children's books and poems. His character is depicted in a multitude of ways, varying based on the author's perspective and the time in which the work was written. Let's explore how the story of Columbus has been told and retold in written works over the centuries. In many early works, Columbus is portrayed as a heroic figure, a brave explorer who courageously ventured into the unknown and opened up the new world to Europe. This narrative is common in children's books, which often simplify Columbus's story to highlight themes of adventure, discovery, and perseverance. For instance, in the picture book Follow the Dream, The Story of Christopher Columbus by Peter Siss, Columbus's journey is presented as a tale of determination and dream fulfillment. In contrast, more recent literature tends to present a more complex and critical view of Columbus. Authors like James Lewin, in Lies My Teacher Told Me, challenge the traditional narrative, delving into the darker aspects of Columbus's voyages, such as the harsh treatment of indigenous peoples and the negative effects of colonization. These works aim to provide a more balanced understanding of Columbus's legacy. Biographies of Columbus also vary widely in their portrayal of the explorer. Some, like Samuel Eliot Morrison's Admiral of the Ocean Sea, portray Columbus in a largely positive light, emphasizing his navigational skills and courage. Others, like Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, offer a critical view, focusing on the devastation Columbus's voyages brought to the indigenous populations. There are also works of fiction where Columbus is a character. In these, authors use Columbus as a symbol to explore themes of exploration, colonialism, and the clash of cultures. In The Dream of the Celt, by Mario Vargas Llosa, for instance, Columbus's journey is woven into a broader narrative about European encounters with indigenous civilizations. Columbus's presence in literature is vast and varied, reflecting the ongoing debate about his legacy. As we read these works, we are invited to question, learn, and form our own understandings of this multifaceted figure. Through these many portrayals, the story of Columbus continues to be a source of fascination, controversy, and discussion. From the silver screen to the television in our living rooms, Christopher Columbus's life and voyages have long been a topic of interest in visual storytelling. These portrayals vary significantly, reflecting the changing societal attitudes towards Columbus over the years. Let's dive into how Columbus has been depicted in movies and television shows. Early films about Columbus, such as the 1949 film Christopher Columbus, present a heroic and romanticized version of the explorer. This film follows Columbus from his initial struggle to secure funding for his voyage to his triumphant return. The explorer is portrayed as a brave, determined figure whose discoveries brought together two worlds. However, as societal perspectives shifted, so too did the on-screen portrayals of Columbus. The 1992 film 1492, Conquest of Paradise, released on the 500th anniversary of Columbus's first voyage, offers a more nuanced portrayal. While it still showcases Columbus's determination and navigational skills, the film also addresses the violent conflict and devastation brought upon the indigenous people. The trend towards a more critical portrayal of Columbus continues into the 21st century. For instance, in the 2006 miniseries Heroes and Villains, Columbus is shown as a complex character whose ambition and desire for wealth lead to both exploration and exploitation. Animation and children's programming have also grappled with how to present Columbus. Educational shows like Horrible Histories and Hysteria have episodes dedicated to Columbus that try to balance the acknowledgement of his navigational accomplishments with the impact of his voyages on indigenous populations. Documentaries provide another perspective on Columbus. These often attempt to separate the man from the myth, using historical evidence to paint a more accurate picture of Columbus's life and impact. They often address the contentious debates around Columbus, such as the 2018 documentary The Truth About Columbus. As we watch these various depictions of Columbus, we see how each reflects the era in which it was created. From hero to villain, from adventurer to conqueror, Columbus's on-screen image changes as society's understanding and interpretation of his legacy evolves. These portrayals not only inform our perceptions of Columbus, but also provide a mirror to our societal values and historical consciousness. Columbus Day, a holiday celebrated in the United States and other countries, serves as a powerful reminder of how Christopher Columbus's legacy has been commemorated over the centuries. However, the day is not without controversy. To understand why, let's delve into the history and debates surrounding this annual event. Columbus Day originated in the late 19th century, primarily as a celebration within the Italian-American community. As an Italian who sailed under the Spanish flag, Columbus was a figure of pride for many Italian immigrants in America. The first recorded Columbus Day celebration in the United States took place in New York City in 1866, organized by the Italian community. In 1937, President Franklin D. Roosevelt officially declared October 12 as Columbus Day, a national holiday to commemorate Columbus's landing in the New World in 1492. The day was seen as an opportunity to celebrate the discovery of America and the contributions of Italian Americans. However, as our understanding of history evolved, so did attitudes towards Columbus Day. Critics began to point out that Columbus did not discover America in the literal sense. Millions of people were already living in the Americas when he arrived. Furthermore, Columbus's treatment of these indigenous populations, which included enslavement and violence, started to cast a shadow over the celebrations. Indigenous peoples and their allies have long protested Columbus Day. They argue that the holiday glorifies colonization and the suffering it brought to Native Americans. As an alternative, some have proposed celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day on the same day to honor the rich histories and cultures of indigenous populations. In response to this controversy, several United States and cities have officially changed the holiday's name from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, marking a significant shift in how this historical event is recognized and remembered. As we reflect on Columbus Day, we are reminded that history is not static, but a continually evolving dialogue between the past and the present. The controversy surrounding this holiday invites us to think critically about who we choose to honor and why, and how we can engage with history in a way that acknowledges both the achievements and the suffering it encompasses. Chapter 10. Reflections on Columbus. Behind every historical figure is a human being, a person with dreams, fears, strengths, and weaknesses. In this part, we will delve deeper into the personality of Christopher Columbus, beyond his role as an explorer. Who was the man behind the legend? Columbus was a determined and ambitious man. His dream of finding a westward sea route to Asia was deemed impossible by many of his contemporaries, yet he persisted. His determination was rewarded when the Spanish monarchs agreed to finance his voyage. Columbus's ambition was not just about exploration. He also aimed to convert the indigenous people he encountered to Christianity. However, Columbus's ambition also had a dark side. His drive for wealth and fame, coupled with a lack of respect for the indigenous people he encountered, led to many atrocities. Reports from his time as governor of Hispaniola paint a picture of a man who was ruthless in his quest for gold and who inflicted horrific punishments on those who disobeyed him. Columbus was a man of great courage, a trait he needed for his perilous voyages across the Atlantic. The fear of the unknown, the harsh conditions at sea, and the potential for mutiny required a leader of considerable bravery. This courage, however, was intertwined with a sense of destiny that some might interpret as arrogance. Columbus was convinced that he had a divine mission, a belief that sometimes led him to disregard the advice and warnings of others. As a navigator, Columbus was skilled but flawed. His voyages revealed a man with the ability to navigate uncharted waters with incredible determination. However, his persistent belief that he had reached Asia, despite mounting evidence to the contrary, displayed a stubbornness and an unwillingness to admit mistakes. In personal relationships, Columbus was a complex figure. He was known to be charming and persuasive, qualities that helped him gain the support of the Spanish monarchs and maintain control over his crew. Yet, he was also known to be demanding, often alienating those around him with his high expectations and quick temper. Reflecting on Christopher Columbus, the man behind the legend gives us a more nuanced understanding of this significant historical figure. He was a man of determination and courage, ambition and ruthlessness, charm and stubbornness. As we conclude this exploration of Columbus's life, we are reminded that history is made by imperfect humans, and understanding their humanity helps us better comprehend the complexities of the past. Every story has a moral, and the story of Christopher Columbus is no exception. His life, filled with triumphs and failures, victories and mistakes, offers us numerous lessons. One of the first lessons to be gleaned from Columbus's life is the value of determination. Despite many obstacles and rejections, Columbus never gave up on his dream to find a westward sea route to Asia. His steadfast perseverance eventually won him the backing of the Spanish monarchs and the chance to embark on his legendary voyages. This demonstrates that success often demands resilience and an unwavering belief in one's goals, even in the face of adversity. However, Columbus's life also provides a warning about the dangers of unbridled ambition. His desire for wealth and fame led him to exploit the indigenous peoples he encountered, leading to their suffering and decimation. This teaches us that while ambition can drive us towards our goals, it should never compromise our values or the rights and welfare of others. Another lesson we can learn from Columbus is the importance of adaptability. Despite being a skilled navigator, Columbus remained convinced that he had reached Asia, even when evidence suggested otherwise. This stubbornness hindered his understanding of the world he had stumbled upon. Therefore, Columbus's story reminds us to remain open to new information and to be willing to adapt our beliefs and strategies when confronted with new evidence. Additionally, Columbus's story underscores the importance of leadership and the qualities required for effective governance. His tenure as governor of Hispaniola was marked by harsh rule and poor administration, which led to rebellion and his eventual arrest. From this, we learn that good leadership requires fairness, effective management, and a respect for the rights and dignity of all. Lastly, Columbus's life reminds us that historical figures are human, with their own sets of virtues and flaws. While we may admire Columbus for his courage and resilience, we also recognize his failures and shortcomings. This understanding can help us approach historical figures with a balanced perspective, appreciating their contributions while acknowledging their mistakes. In conclusion, Christopher Columbus's life, filled with grand adventures and complex dilemmas, serves as a rich source of lessons for us all. These lessons can inspire us, caution us, and, most importantly, encourage us to reflect on our own actions and choices. Even hundreds of years after Columbus's voyages, the effects of his discoveries continue to shape our world today. His journeys mark a significant turning point in history that set off a chain of events, influencing the way we live, think, and interact with the world around us. One of the most significant outcomes of Columbus's voyages is the profound exchange between the Old World and the New. After Columbus's first voyage, a period known as the Columbian Exchange began. This was a widespread exchange of animals, plants, culture, human populations, technology, diseases, and ideas between the American and Afro-Eurasian hemispheres. The world we live in today, with its global interconnectedness, shared resources, and mingled cultures, owes much to this crucial period of exchange. In addition, Columbus's voyages led to the eventual colonization of the Americas by European powers. The cultural, political, and economic effects of this colonization can still be felt today. The modern political boundaries, societal structures, and cultural landscapes of North and South America are, in many ways, a product of the historical events that Columbus's voyages set in motion. The legacy of Columbus's voyages also extends to our understanding of the world and our place within it. Before Columbus, the prevailing view in Europe was that the world was divided into 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Columbus's journey, however, challenged this understanding, opening Europeans' eyes to the existence of a whole new world. This reshaped the European worldview, expanding the horizons of what was thought possible and known. Columbus's voyages also set the stage for the rise of Western Europe as a dominant power during the Age of Exploration. The wealth and resources brought back from the New World, along with the new sea routes to Asia, propelled the economies of European nations. These nations eventually grew to dominate much of the world, shaping global politics and economics in ways that persist today. Finally, the debate surrounding Columbus's legacy reflects ongoing discussions about the nature of exploration, colonization, and cultural interaction. These dialogues compel us to consider the complex and sometimes painful history of our world, and to seek a more comprehensive and empathetic understanding of our shared human story. In essence, the journey that Columbus started more than 5 centuries ago is far from over. Its effects continue to unfold, influencing our lives and our world in ways both seen and unseen. As we move forward, we carry the legacy of Columbus's voyages with us, serving as a reminder of our past as we navigate towards the future.